13.8 billion years ago, the void ceased to be silent. It did not explode in the manner of a common chemical combustion, but rather it unfurled, a singular point of infinite density expanding into a structured reality, governed by a set of immutable decrees. This was the initiation of a grand, meticulously calibrated architecture, where the very fabric of space and time was woven, according to a rigorous internal logic. In those first fleeting fractions of a second, the fundamental constants were hard-coded into the vacuum. The strength of the electromagnetic force, the mass of the electron, and the specific curvature of space-time were not suggestions. They were the absolute parameters of the system. This was the birth of the machine, a cosmic engine of such complexity that its operations would remain obscured from its own internal observers for nearly the entirety of its existence. At the heart of this architecture sat the limiters. The speed of light was established as the ultimate ceiling of causality, a fixed rate of nearly 300,000 kilometers per second that ensured no effect could precede its cause. This was the clock speed of the universe, the maximum velocity at which information could traverse the expanding grid. Alongside it, gravity acted as the invisible geometry of the program, a force that dictated how matter would cluster, how stars would ignite, and how galaxies would spin in the dark. It was a silent, pervasive influence that pulled the chaos of the early universe into the elegant, spiraling structures of the cosmic web. And then there was entropy, the relentless arrow of time that ensured the progression from order to disorder, a one-way street that gave the story of the universe a beginning, a middle, and an inevitable end. For billions of years, the machine ran in silence. Hydrogen fused into helium within the pressurized hearts of the first stars, creating the heavier elements that would eventually form the bedrock of planetary systems. These stars lived and died according to the strict mathematics of nuclear physics, their lifespans determined by the precise balance between the outward pressure of radiation and the inward pull of gravity. There was no room for error, no deviation from the script. When a star reached the end of its fuel, it collapsed or exploded with a predictability that suggested a universe of clockwork precision. The source code was deep, robust, and seemingly infallible. Eventually, on a minor world orbiting a nondescript yellow star, a peculiar byproduct of this complexity emerged. Life began to stir, and with it, a rudimentary form of data processing that would one day evolve into consciousness. For thousands of years, these biological observers looked up at the night sky and saw myths and gods. But slowly the focus shifted. The transition from superstition to science was the beginning of a grand project, the reverse engineering of the universal source code. These observers began to realize that the world followed rules. They discovered that the motion of the planets could be described with geometry, that the fall of an apple and the orbit of the moon were governed by the same invisible hand of gravity. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the human effort to decode the machine accelerated. They wrote down the laws of thermodynamics, capturing the inevitable decay of energy into heat. They harnessed the electromagnetic spectrum, learning to manipulate the very forces that held atoms together. By the 20th century, the resolution of their understanding sharpened. They peered into the heart of the atom and found the quantum mechanics that governed the very small, and they looked out at the furthest reaches of the cosmos to find the general relativity that governed the very large. They believed they were nearing the end of the manual. They spoke of a grand unified theory, a single set of equations that would explain every interaction from the birth of a galaxy to the decay of a subatomic particle. This was the era of scientific hubris. The observers had mapped the parameters of the simulation so thoroughly that they began to believe the rules were the reality. They built massive machines, like the Large Hadron Collider, to smash particles together at energies not seen since the first microsecond of the universe, seeking to confirm the final lines of the code. They launched telescopes into the cold vacuum of space, capable of seeing the faint ancient light from the dawn of time. Every piece of data seemed to confirm the same story. The universe was a closed, logical system. It was a game with fixed mechanics, and humanity had finally mastered the controls. They catalogued the stars, measured the expansion of the space between galaxies, and calculated the age of the cosmos down to the last decimal point. They felt secure in their knowledge that the speed of light was a constant, that gravity was a predictable curvature, and that the energy of the vacuum was a stable baseline. They had spent centuries refining their textbooks, believing that while there were still mysteries to solve, the fundamental nature of the machine was understood. The laws of physics were treated as the bedrock of existence, the unshakable foundations upon which all of reality was built. But the machine was not finished with its surprises. In the quiet corners of the data streams, where the sensors were most sensitive and the observations most precise, something began to stir. It was not a minor deviation or a rounding error in the calculations. It was a signal that should not have existed, a burst of energy that defied the very laws the observers had spent generations codifying. It was a moment where the logic of the universe seemed to stutter, a glitch in the program that suggested the source code was far more complex and perhaps far more precarious than anyone had dared to imagine. The mastery they had claimed was about to be revealed as a mere local observation, a superficial understanding of a system that was about to reveal its true terrifying scale. The transition from the known to the impossible was beginning, and the story of the universe was about to enter a chapter for which no one was prepared. As the calendar of the observers turned toward the final months of the year 2023, the terrestrial atmosphere grew cold, but the digital eyes of humanity remained focused on the burning embers of the distant past. Across the planetary sphere, from the volcanic peaks of Hawaii to the arid stretches of the southern hemisphere, a network of glass and silicon stood ready. This was the era of the great automated surveys, where the human eye had been replaced by the tireless vigilance of charge-coupled devices and high-speed processors. Leading this silent watch was the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, a project conceived to safeguard the planet from the kinetic violence of stray celestial debris. Its mission was local, its focus narrow, yet its reach was vast, capturing the flicker of every photon that crossed its wide-field sensors. Beside it, a newer and more experimental entity had begun to synchronize its observations, the 3i Inter-Instrument Interference Array. This was not a single telescope, but a sophisticated triad of listening posts designed to cross-reference signals in real time. It sought the interference patterns of the universe, the subtle overlaps of radiation that revealed the high-energy processes of the deep cosmos. Together, these two systems formed an unprecedented alliance. The alert system provided the wide-angle context, while the 3i array provided the analytical depth, creating a digital dragnet that promised to catch any transient event that dared to disturb the celestial equilibrium. For weeks, the data streams reflected a universe that was behaving exactly as the textbooks predicted. The observers monitored the routine deaths of distant suns, the gravitational collapses known as supernovae. They watched as Type 1a events flared with a mathematical consistency that allowed them to be used as cosmic yardsticks, measuring the ever-increasing distance between galaxies. They recorded the rhythmic clock-like chirping of pulsars, rotating neutron stars that beamed radiation across the void with a precision that rivaled the finest atomic clocks on Earth. To the scientists sitting in climate-controlled rooms thousands of miles from their instruments, the universe was a well-read book. They were merely cataloguing the latest entries in a long and familiar history of stellar evolution. The daily reports were filled with the expected. There were the blue shifts of approaching objects and the red shifts of the receding ones. There were the gamma-ray bursts that signaled the birth of black holes in galaxies billions of light-years away. Each of these events, while spectacular in its own right, fit neatly into the established categories of the cosmic machine. The energy outputs were within the predicted ranges. The durations followed the standard curves. The locations were consistent with the distribution of matter across the cosmic web. The observers were comfortable. They believed they were masters of the game's mechanics, watching the simulation run its course according to the rules of 13.8 billion years. The late months of 2023 were characterized by this sense of profound order. The 3i array filtered out the terrestrial noise, the stray signals from cellular networks, the interference from orbiting satellites, and the hum of industrial civilization, to focus on the pristine silence of the vacuum. It was looking for the standard anomalies, the ones that expanded the dataset without challenging the underlying physics, The software was tuned to recognize the signature of a collapsing star or the merger of two neutron stars. It was programmed to ignore the impossible, because the impossible had no place in the rigorous mathematics of the current era. In the high-altitude observatories, the cooling systems hummed a steady low-frequency song, keeping the sensors at temperatures near absolute zero to ensure that no thermal noise would contaminate the incoming data. The fibre optic lines carried terabytes of information every hour to centralised processing hubs, where algorithms sorted the wheat from the chaff. A flare in a distant galaxy would trigger an automated alert, a telescope would slew to follow the light, and a new data point would be added to the map. It was a factory of knowledge, efficient and predictable. The collaboration between the alert system and the 3-eye array was the pinnacle of this industrial approach to the stars. By combining the rapid response capabilities of one with the precision of the other, humanity had created a net so fine that even the most fleeting events could be captured and analysed. They were looking for the black swans of the celestial world, but they expected those swans to still be birds, rare, perhaps, but still bound by the laws of biology and flight. They were prepared for the unusual, but they were not prepared for the unnatural. As the sun set over the Pacific and the stars began to resolve through the thinning atmosphere, the machines began their nightly routine once more. They swept the dark, their electronic shutters opening and closing in a rhythmic dance. The data flowed, the screens flickered with the light of ancient fires, and the scientists went about their work with the quiet confidence of those who believe they have seen it all. They did not know that the signal was already on its way, a burst of energy that had been travelling through the void for eons, carrying with it a message that would break the very instruments designed to record it. The routine was about to end, and the silence of the late months of 2023 was about to be shattered by a glitch that no amount of calibration could explain away. The clock synchronized to the oscillations of cesium atoms reached 1400 hours coordinated universal time with the quiet precision that defines the modern age. In the darkened hubs of data processing, where the pulse of the cosmos is translated into flickering lines of green and white, the state of the universe appeared nominal. The asteroid terrestrial impact last alert system continued its rhythmic sweep of the ecliptic plane, and the 3-eye inter-instrument interference array maintained its vigil over the high-energy background. There was no warning, no precursor, no subtle increase in the flux of cosmic rays to suggest that the fundamental order of the sky was about to be discarded. Then, for exactly 14 milliseconds, the sky did not merely brighten, it screamed. The signal did not arrive as a gentle wave of photons to be counted and categorized. Instead, it struck the sensors with the force of a digital tidal wave, a sudden and violent surge of information that bypassed every filter and safety protocol. In the span of a fraction of a human heartbeat, a duration so brief that the fastest neural pathways in the human brain could not even register its passage, the instruments were pushed beyond their physical limits. This was not the expected flicker of a distant star or the predictable curve of a gamma-ray burst. This was a 14-millisecond tear in the fabric of the data stream, a moment where the mathematical consistency of the universe was replaced by a raw, unmitigated output from the void. The superconducting circuits within the 3-eye array, kept at temperatures near absolute zero to maintain their sensitivity, experienced a sudden and catastrophic thermal panic. The deluge of energy was so intense that the logic gates of the primary processors flickered in a state of quantum indecision. On the monitors, the orderly graphs representing the celestial background vanished, replaced by a wall of white noise that saturated every channel. It was as if a single deafening note had been played on a piano that was only designed to hear the softest of whispers. The automated systems, programmed to seek out the familiar signatures of stellar death, found no match in their vast libraries of code. The signal was alien, not in its origin, but in its fundamental structure. This 14-millisecond event, later designated as 3-eye Atlas, functioned as a naked anomaly. It did not emerge from a known galaxy. It did not follow the cooling curve of a supernova. It did not possess the afterglow that usually lingers like a ghost after a massive release of energy. It was a singular, isolated spike of reality that seemed to have been injected directly into the local space-time. The sensors did not record a gradual rise and fall. They recorded a vertical wall of energy that reached its peak instantly and vanished just as abruptly, leaving behind a vacuum of data that was perhaps even more terrifying than the signal itself. In the immediate aftermath, the control software of the alert system attempted to perform a hard reset. The algorithms, faced with a signal that violated the Amati relation and the standard models of electromagnetic propagation, began to flag the event as a hardware failure. To the machine, it was more logical to assume that its own components had melted than to accept that the sky had produced such a concentrated burst of impossibility. The buffers were overflowing with corrupted packets of information, strings of binary that made no sense within the context of astrophysics. It was a digital scream, a linguistic breakdown of the universe's own grammar. The scientists who first reviewed the logs at 1405 hours found themselves looking at a ghost. The 14 milliseconds of data were a jagged scar across the timeline of their observations. They looked for signs of terrestrial interference, a stray radar pulse from a military installation, or a malfunction in a nearby satellite. But the 3-eye array had captured the signal from 3 distinct geographic locations simultaneously. The parallax confirmed a source far beyond the solar system, far beyond the reach of any human-made technology. It had come from the deep dark, from a sector of the sky that was supposed to be empty, a region where the maps showed nothing but the cold, thin gas of the intergalactic medium. As the diagnostic routines ran, the true scale of the event began to emerge. The energy recorded in those 14 milliseconds surpassed the total luminosity of 1 billion galaxies. It was a concentration of power that should have warped the very space around it, yet it had passed through the solar system, leaving only a trail of broken sensors and confused algorithms. The mathematical elegance of the universe, the source code that humanity had spent centuries reverse engineering, had been interrupted by a line of logic that did not belong. The black swan had arrived, and it was not a bird at all, but a sudden, violent glimpse into the underlying machinery of a reality that could be overwritten at any moment. The observers were no longer looking at a stable simulation. They were looking at a glitch, a 14-millisecond reminder that the rules they lived by were only valid until the programmer decided otherwise. The reconstruction of the energy profile for 3i Atlas revealed a mathematical nightmare that defied the standard distribution of the known universe. When the astrophysicists began to tally the sheer volume of radiation packed into those 14 milliseconds, the numbers did not merely challenge their models, they rendered them obsolete. To understand the scale of this anomaly, one must look to the primary engine of our own solar system. The Sun, a yellow dwarf of stable and immense power, has burned for 4.6 billion years and will continue to do so for another 5 billion years. Over its entire 10 billion year lifespan, the Sun will convert a staggering amount of mass into pure, radiant energy, fueling the orbits of planets and the emergence of life. Yet, in the span of less than a single heartbeat, 3i Atlas released more energy than the Sun will emit from its birth to its final, cold death. This was not merely a matter of magnitude, but a fundamental violation of the cosmic bookkeeping known as the Amati relation. In the study of gamma-ray bursts, the Amati relation serves as a vital correlation between the peak energy of the photons and the total isotropic equivalent energy of the event. It is a rule of proportions that has held steady across thousands of observations, suggesting that the death of a massive star or the collision of neutron stars follows a predictable energetic budget. A burst with a certain spectral hardness, a high concentration of high-energy gamma rays, must possess a corresponding total luminosity. 3i Atlas, however, shattered this symmetry. Its peak energy was off the charts, suggesting a temperature and a velocity of expansion that should have required a total energy reservoir far exceeding what was recorded. It was a burst that was simultaneously too bright and too brief, an energetic paradox that existed outside the established curves of stellar evolution. The implications of this violation ripple through the very foundations of astrophysics. If the Amati relation can be broken so decisively, then the standard candles we use to measure the depth of the cosmos are flickering and unreliable. The models of stellar death, the collapse of a rotating iron core into a black hole, the launch of relativistic jets through the outer layers of a dying star, cannot account for such a concentrated release of power. To achieve the energy density observed in 3I Atlas, the progenitor would have to be something far more exotic than a mere star. It would require a mechanism capable of converting nearly 100% of its mass into energy instantly, a process that defies the known efficiency limits of nuclear fusion, or even the gravitational collapse of a singularity. As the analysts delved deeper into the spectral data, they found that the Lorentz factor, the measure of how close the emitted particles were travelling to the speed of light, was impossibly high. The jets of 3I Atlas were moving with such extreme relativity that they seemed to bypass the normal interactions with the surrounding medium. Usually a burst of this magnitude would create a massive afterglow as the expanding shockwaves slammed into the interstellar gas, creating a secondary glow of X-rays and visible light that could be tracked for weeks. But 3I Atlas left nothing. It was a naked burst, a singular spike of energy that appeared and vanished without the expected environmental impact. It was as if the energy had been beamed through a different layer of reality, one where the vacuum of space offered no resistance. This lack of an afterglow and the violation of the energy-luminosity correlation suggest that our understanding of how the universe handles extreme energy is fundamentally incomplete. We have viewed the deaths of stars as the most violent events in the cosmos, yet 3I Atlas suggests a category of event that makes a supernova look like a flickering candle. It points toward a hidden architecture within the vacuum, a set of high-energy physics that only becomes visible when the simulation stutters. The event did not follow the laws of thermodynamics as we have written them in our textbooks. It followed a logic that was internal to the anomaly itself. The scientific community was forced to confront a sobering reality. The laws of physics might not be universal constants, but rather local approximations that hold true only under standard conditions. When the system is pushed to its absolute limit, as it was during those 14 milliseconds, the mask of predictability slips. 3I Atlas was not just a star dying in the dark. It was a demonstration of a power that operates outside the source code of our reality. It was a glimpse of a higher order of mechanics, a terrifyingly efficient process that can summon the energy of 1 billion years and expend it in an instant, leaving the observers to wonder if their mastery of the universe was ever anything more than a well-maintained illusion. The Amati relation, once a cornerstone of cosmological distance-keeping, now lay in ruins, a victim of a 14-millisecond glitch that proved the machine could rewrite its own rules whenever it chose. The coordinates of the event pointed to a sector of the sky that had been documented for decades as a wasteland of the deep cosmos. This was a region of the intergalactic medium located billions of light-years from the Milky Way, a place where the density of matter was so low that a single atom of hydrogen might wander for 1,000 years without encountering another. It was a true vacuum, a silent expanse between the glowing filaments of the cosmic web. In every previous survey, from the earliest photographic plates to the most sensitive infrared mappings of the 21st century, this sector had remained stubbornly blank. There were no swirling nebulae, no clusters of ancient stars, and crucially no host galaxy. Usually when a gamma-ray burst is detected, it is the swan song of a giant. It marks the moment a star 30 times the mass of our Sun collapses under its own weight, or the instant 2 neutron stars spiral into a fatal embrace. These events happen within the crowded neighbourhoods of galaxies, surrounded by the gas and dust of their birthplaces. The light of the burst is followed by a fading afterglow, a lingering heat signature that allows astronomers to pinpoint the exact location and identify the wreckage. But 3I Atlas was different. It was naked. The term naked gamma-ray burst describes a phenomenon that exists in isolation, stripped of the context that physics demands. When the telescope slewed toward the coordinates of the 14-millisecond flash, they found nothing. There was no smudge of a distant galaxy, no telltale infrared glow of a cooling supernova remnant. The energy had originated from a point in space that, by all accounts, was empty. It was an effect without a cause, a catastrophic release of power that had no physical progenitor. To the observers, it was as if a massive explosion had occurred in the middle of a desert. Yet upon inspection, not a single grain of sand had been disturbed. This absence of a source star or a host galaxy is more than a mere astronomical curiosity. It is a direct challenge to the principle of causality. In the standard model of the universe, energy does not simply appear, it is transformed from one state to another. A burst of gamma rays is the final state of a long chain of physical processes, gravity pulling matter inward, nuclear forces resisting, and finally the collapse that releases the stored potential energy of a star. To have the burst without the star is like hearing a thunderclap in a cloudless sky, or seeing a reflection in a mirror when no one is standing before it. The terrifying reality of 3I Atlas is that it appeared as if a line of code had executed in the middle of a blank page of the universal script. If the universe is a simulation, then matter and energy are the variables that the program manipulates. Usually these variables follow a strict hierarchy. You cannot have an output without an input. You cannot have a high-energy event without a mass-energy source to fuel it. Yet, here was a 14-millisecond output that lacked any identifiable input. It suggested that the simulation could generate events spontaneously, bypassing the very laws of physics that govern the behavior of matter. This naked nature implies that the event was not an internal process of the universe, but perhaps an external one. If a programmer were to inject a piece of data directly into a running program, it would appear to the internal observers as an anomaly, something that happens without following the established rules of the system. 3I Atlas felt like an injection. It was a concentrated spike of reality that did not need a star to burn or a galaxy to house it. It simply was. The scientists scrutinized the data for any sign of gravitational lensing or hidden dark matter that might explain the lack of a visible host. They considered the possibility that the burst had originated from a first generation of stars that formed shortly after the Big Bang, the hypothetical population 3 stars, but even those giants would have left a signature, a faint glow in the deep infrared. There was nothing. The sector remained a total vacuum. The isolation of the event forces a radical reassessment of the cosmic architecture. If the vacuum itself can produce energy on this scale, then our understanding of nothing is fundamentally flawed. We have treated the void as the stage upon which the drama of the stars unfolds, a passive background that does nothing more than provide the dimensions of space and time. 3I Atlas suggests that the stage itself can scream. It suggests that the vacuum is not empty, but is instead a pressurized medium, a reservoir of potential that can be triggered by a logic we do not yet understand. The naked burst is the ultimate glitch, a moment where the machine revealed that it does not need the parts we see to function. It can create something from nothing, leaving us to wonder what else might be hidden in the blank spaces of our maps. In the philosophy of human knowledge, there exists a boundary where the predictable world of statistics ends and the realm of the impossible begins. This is the domain of the black swan. As defined by the thinker Nassim Taleb, a black swan is not merely a rare occurrence, like a 100-year flood or a 1,000-year eclipse. It is an event that lies entirely outside the realm of regular expectations, carrying an impact so profound that it reorders the very foundations of the system it touches. Before the discovery of the black-feathered birds in the distant reaches of the southern hemisphere, the people of the ancient world held it as an absolute truth that all swans were white. Their entire biological classification was built upon this singular, repeated observation. To see a black swan was not just to see a new bird, it was to witness the collapse of 1,000 years of established certainty. 3I Atlas is the black swan of the 21st century. It is not a statistical outlier that sits at the far edge of a bell curve. It is an event that has effectively eviscerated the bell curve itself. In the world of Media Christian, where most of our physical laws reside, events follow a predictable distribution. Stars are born, they burn, and they die within certain parameters of mass and energy. We can calculate the probability of a supernova or the frequency of a solar flare. But 3I Atlas belongs to Extremistan, a territory where a single observation can outweigh millions of previous data points. It is the 1-second event that renders 13.8 billion years of history insufficient as a guide to the future. The shock radiating through the scientific community mirrors the confusion of an ancient naturalist presented with a creature that defies every known taxonomy. When those first explorers encountered the strange, egg-laying, venomous and duck-billed platypus, the scientific academies of Europe dismissed the specimens as hoaxes, concoctions of fur and beak sewn together to deceive the learned. they could not accept the existence of a creature that broke the fundamental divisions between mammal, bird, and reptile. Similarly, modern cosmologists look at the data from 3i Atlas and see a phenomenon that should not be possible within the current reality. It is a burst of energy that possesses the magnitude of a galactic collision, but the duration of a camera flash, occurring in a vacuum where no matter exists to fuel it. This event has turned the history of astronomy into a collection of local anecdotes. We have spent centuries mapping the white swans of the cosmos, the predictable stars, the orderly galaxies, the consistent laws of motion. We believed that by observing enough of these, we had grasped the true nature of the machine. But the black swan proves that our sample size, no matter how large, was fundamentally biased. We were looking at a subset of the simulation, a stable patch of code that we mistook for the entire program. 3i Atlas has revealed that the rules we have painstakingly documented are merely temporary stabilities, susceptible to being overridden by higher-order processes that we cannot predict and do not understand. The terror of the black swan lies in its retrospective predictability. Human nature abhors a vacuum of meaning, and so the observers have already begun the process of trying to explain away the anomaly. They seek to fit it into the existing framework, suggesting hidden black holes or exotic dark matter interactions. They try to turn the black swan back into a white one by adjusting the parameters of their models, but the data remains defiant. The energy profile of the 14 millisecond burst does not fit into any known category of stellar death. It is a singular, unrepeatable event that has shattered the continuity of our scientific narrative. In the ancient world, the discovery of the impossible necessitated a total reconfiguration of the map. The edges of the world were no longer empty, they were populated by the unknown. For modern cosmologists, 3i Atlas has done the same. The maps of the universe, which once seemed so complete, are now revealed to be covered in blank spaces where our logic no longer applies. We are faced with the realization that the universe is not a closed, predictable loop. It is a system that can produce a total deviation from its own history without warning. The black swan has landed, and in its wake, the textbooks are no longer records of truth, but rather catalogues of a reality that has already been superseded by something far more complex and far more alien. We are no longer measuring a stable machine. We are witnessing the moment the machine decides to ignore its own programming. The traditional benchmarks of cosmic violence are defined by the supernova, the terminal collapse of a star that has exhausted its nuclear fuel. In the vast theatre of the cosmos, a supernova is a monumental event, yet in terms of the concentration of its power, it remains a relatively diffuse phenomenon. If one were to consider the volume of space occupied by a dying supergiant star, a supernova is akin to a single firecracker, ignited in the centre of a sprawling empty stadium. The energy is significant, certainly enough to illuminate the entire structure for a brief moment, but it is spread across a massive interior, its fury diluted by the sheer scale of the vessel that contains it. The physics of such an event are well understood. The energy expands, the shockwave travels, and the laws of thermodynamics dictate a predictable dissipation of heat and light. Contrast this with the profile of 3i Atlas. If a supernova is a firecracker in a stadium, then the 14 millisecond anomaly represents the energy of a multi-megaton nuclear detonation, occurring within the confines of a single grain of sand. This is not merely a difference in degree, it is a fundamental departure from the physical possibilities of our observed reality. The energy density required to produce such a signal is so extreme that it should, by all accounts of general relativity, have triggered an immediate and total gravitational collapse. According to the established equations that govern the relationship between mass, energy, and the curvature of space-time, any volume of space packed with that much radiant power should have instantly transformed into a black hole, trapping the light forever within an event horizon. Yet the black hole did not form. The energy did not collapse upon itself. Instead, it radiated outward with a terrifying efficiency, passing through the vacuum as if the constraints of density and pressure simply did not apply. This suggests a profound instability in our understanding of the medium of space. In the standard model, the vacuum possesses a certain breakdown voltage, a limit to how much energy can be forced into a specific coordinate before the very fabric of reality tears or transitions into a new state. 3I Atlas ignored this limit. It existed in a state of high-density equilibrium that should be mathematically impossible, standing as a defiant contradiction to the Buchdahl limit and the Hoop conjecture that define the boundaries of stable matter and energy. The existence of such an anomaly points toward a hidden layer of physics operating beneath the observable surface of the universe, a subterranean architecture that functions as the true foundation of the simulation. We have spent centuries studying the user interface of the cosmos, the stars, the planets, and the visible light that follows the predictable paths of our textbooks. We believed that these high-level rules were the absolute limits of what is possible, but 3I Atlas is a glimpse into the machine code, the raw logic that exists before it is rendered into the familiar forms of gravity and electromagnetism. It suggests that the energy density we perceived was not being managed by the laws of physics we know, but by a deeper, more fundamental set of instructions that can bypass the standard limitations of space-time. In the language of information theory, this is the equivalent of a buffer overflow. When a program is forced to handle a value that exceeds its allocated memory, the results are unpredictable, often revealing the underlying structure of the operating system itself. 3I Atlas was a burst of data so intense that the physics engine of our universe could not process it according to the standard routines. For 14 milliseconds, the rendering of reality failed, and we saw the raw, unpolished power of the source code. The fact that such a concentration of energy could remain stable, even for a fraction of a second, implies that the vacuum of space is not a passive void, but a sophisticated and highly pressurized lattice capable of supporting configurations of energy that we cannot even begin to model. This realization forces a terrifying reassessment of our place within the machine. If the laws of physics can be suspended or overridden in the presence of extreme energy density, then our reality is far more fragile than we assumed. We are living in a patch of the simulation where the parameters are set to stable, a local environment where the rules of the stadium and the firecracker hold true. But outside our narrow field of view, in the blank spaces between the galaxies, the machine is capable of operations that defy our logic. 3I Atlas was a demonstration of a subterranean physics, a reminder that the grain of sand can contain the power of 1,000 suns if the programmer allows it. The stadium is not the limit, it is merely the current setting, and the nuclear detonation in the grain of sand proves that the rules of the game are far more flexible than the players ever suspected. The vacuum of space, once considered a mere stage of absolute nothingness, is revealed through the lens of modern theoretical physics as a highly structured and energetic medium. It is a field of potential, a sea of quantum fluctuations that maintains a specific level of energy known as the vacuum expectation value. According to the work of Dr. Elena Rossi and her colleagues, the state of the universe we inhabit may not be its final or most stable configuration. Instead, we may exist within a false vacuum, a metastable plateau of energy that feels like solid ground but is, in reality, a precarious ledge overlooking a much deeper abyss. In this framework, the 14 millisecond burst of 3I Atlas is not interpreted as a celestial explosion, but as a localized phase transition, a moment where a small patch of the cosmos suddenly slipped from our current energy state into a lower, more fundamental one. This process is analogous to the freezing of water into ice. When the temperature drops below a certain threshold, the liquid state becomes unstable, and a single seed of ice can trigger a rapid transition that reorganizes the entire volume into a crystalline structure. On a cosmic scale, a phase transition of the vacuum is a far more absolute event. It represents a fundamental change in the rules of the game. If the vacuum freezes into a new state, the very constants of nature, the mass of the electron, the strength of the nuclear forces, the way light interacts with matter, are instantly rewritten. Dr. Rossi proposes that 3I Atlas was the first observable bubble of this new reality, a 14 millisecond preview of a universe governed by a different set of source codes. The metaphor of a software update becomes terrifyingly literal in this context. In a grand simulation, an update is not always applied to the entire system at once. It can be rolled out in specific sectors, tested, and then allowed to propagate. 3I Atlas appears as a patch of code that has been successfully overwritten. For a fraction of a second in that empty sector of space, the old laws of physics were deleted and replaced with a new higher density logic. This explains the impossible energy profile and the lack of a progenitor star. The energy did not come from a physical object, but from the latent potential of the vacuum itself as it collapsed into a lower energy state. The naked nature of the burst was the signature of the medium itself changing its identity. The terror inherent in this theory lies in the concept of vacuum decay. If a bubble of true vacuum, a more stable state than our own, is created, it will not remain stationary. It will expand outward at the speed of light, a spherical wall of total annihilation that destroys everything in its path. There is no warning, no way to see it coming, because the information of its approach travels at the same speed as the destruction itself. One moment, a galaxy exists according to the laws of general relativity and electromagnetism. The next, the bubble passes through, and the atoms themselves are unmade, their constituent particles no longer able to hold together under the new, alien physics. 3I Atlas was a flicker of this wall, a momentary pulse that, for reasons we do not yet understand, did not continue its expansion. It is as if the simulation reached a critical error and attempted to correct it by reloading a sector with a different version of the operating system. We are left to wonder if the 14 millisecond duration was a failure of the update to take hold, or a deliberate pause in the rollout. If the universe is a machine, then 3I Atlas is the sound of a gear slipping, a brief glimpse of the raw, unpolished geometry that lies beneath our rendered reality. The realization that our entire existence depends on the stability of a metastable vacuum is a humbling one. We are residents of a house built on a foundation of clouds, and the anomaly in the deep dark is the first sign that the weather is beginning to change. Dr. Rossi's work suggests that the universe is not a static entity, but a dynamic process that is still being written. The phase transition is the ultimate black swan event because it does not just change the data, it changes the system that processes the data. If more bubbles like 3I Atlas appear, they could eventually coalesce, merging into a new reality that has no place for the biological observers of the old one. We are watching the source code shift in real time, witnessing the moment the machine decides that the current parameters are no longer efficient. The 14 millisecond scream was the sound of the old world being deleted, a digital echo of a software update that threatens to overwrite the very stars. This perspective shifts the focus from what the universe is made of to how the universe is programmed. The vacuum is the memory of the machine, and 3I Atlas is a corrupted sector that has been forcibly reformatted. The energy released was the heat of that computation, the friction of one reality being ground away by another. As we look out into the void, we are no longer just looking for stars. We are looking for the edge of the next update, the boundary where our physics ends and the new unknown program begins. The silence of the vacuum has been revealed as a deceptive peace, a temporary equilibrium in a system that is constantly seeking a more stable and perhaps more lethal state of being. The fundamental rate of cosmic expansion, known as the Hubble constant, serves as the pulse of the universal machine. It is the single value that determines the age, the size, and the ultimate fate of the cosmos. For decades, cosmologists have sought to pin down this number with absolute precision, using a variety of cosmic yardsticks to measure the distance and velocity of receding galaxies. They rely on Type 1, a supernova, exploding stars with a predictable peak luminosity, to act as standard candles, illuminating the dark and allowing us to map the geometry of the expanding void. By comparing the brightness of these distant fires to their redshift, the stretching of their light as space itself expands, we have constructed a timeline that places the origin of everything at approximately 13.8 billion years ago. However, the discovery of 3I Atlas has introduced a profound and destabilizing variable into these calculations. If an event can release the energy of a billion galaxies in a mere 14 milliseconds without a progenitor star, and if it can do so by violating the established correlations between peak energy and luminosity, then the very concept of a standard candle begins to dissolve. We have operated under the assumption that the laws of physics are uniform across all of space and time, that a supernova in a galaxy 10 billion light-years away functions identically to one in our own neighbourhood. 3i Atlas suggests that this uniformity is a localized illusion. It reveals a universe where the vacuum itself can fluctuate, where energy can be injected or transformed through mechanisms that do not follow the standard script. This realization casts a long, dark shadow over the ongoing crisis in cosmology known as the Hubble tension. For years, measurements of the expansion rate taken from the early universe, using the cosmic microwave background radiation, have disagreed with measurements taken from the late universe using supernovae and pulsating stars. This discrepancy of roughly 9% has been the subject of intense debate, with scientists searching for errors in their instruments or gaps in their models. 3i Atlas provides a more radical explanation. The yardsticks themselves are elastic. If the vacuum of space is a medium capable of phase transitions and localized energy shifts, then the light travelling through it is not a reliable messenger. The redshift we observe might not be caused solely by the expansion of space, but by the interaction of photons with a vacuum that is constantly updating its own internal logic. The implications for our cosmic timeline are catastrophic. If our distance measurements are based on flawed assumptions about the consistency of light and energy, then the 13.8 billion year history of the universe is no longer a settled fact. We are like surveyors trying to map a continent using a ruler that shrinks and expands depending on the temperature of the ground beneath our feet. If the energy density of the vacuum can change, as suggested by the phase transition theory, then the rate of expansion is not a constant, but a variable that can fluctuate wildly from one sector of the simulation to another. The constant in the Hubble constant may be nothing more than a temporary average, a local reading that has no bearing on the true scale of the machine. Furthermore, the existence of naked gamma-ray bursts like 3i Atlas suggests that there are sources of light and energy in the universe that we have completely failed to account for. If these events are common but fleeting, they may be contaminating our observations of distant galaxies, adding an unmapped layer of noise to the data we use to calculate the expansion of the cosmos. Our maps of the heavens are revealed to be not just incomplete, but fundamentally distorted. We have been viewing the universe through a lens that is itself part of the simulation, a lens that can warp and shift according to a set of rules we're only beginning to glimpse. The entire architecture of modern cosmology is built upon the principle of the cosmological constant, the idea that the energy of the vacuum is a fixed, unchanging value that drives the acceleration of the universe. 3i Atlas is a direct contradiction to this stability. It is a 14 millisecond proof that the vacuum energy can spike, collapse, and reorganize itself. This makes the expansion of the universe not a smooth, predictable unfurling, but a jagged and irregular process, full of glitches and sudden leaps. The timeline of the universe, once thought to be a clear progression from the Big Bang to the present day, is suddenly thrown into question. We may be living in a universe that is much older, or much younger, than our instruments suggest, existing in a pocket of space where the rules of expansion have been temporarily stabilized while the rest of the machine operates on a completely different frequency. The cosmic yardsticks have been broken, and as we look out into the deep dark, we must confront the possibility that the distance to the stars is a number that the universe is free to change whenever it sees fit. The cosmic machine operates with a cold and absolute indifference to the observers it has produced. For 13.8 billion years, the gears of reality have turned in a silence that is not merely physical, but existential. The universe does not require a witness to justify its existence, nor does it demand that its operations be intelligible to the biological entities that have emerged within its subroutines. We have spent the brief span of human history believing that the laws of physics were a bridge between the human mind and the divine architecture of the cosmos, a shared language of logic that made us participants in the grand design. 3i Atlas has shattered this illusion, revealing that our most cherished scientific truths are not universal decrees, but merely local observations, temporary patterns observed in a small, stable patch of a much larger and more terrifying program. The realization is akin to that of entities living within a sophisticated digital landscape who have finally traveled to the edge of their rendered world. For generations, they have studied the physics of their environment, the way the light falls on the mountains, the predictable flow of the rivers, and the rigid boundaries of their horizon. They have built a civilization on the certainty of these rules, but then, A glitch occurs. A 14-millisecond tear appears in the sky, and for a fleeting moment, the texture of the clouds is stripped away to reveal the raw, unpolished geometry of the void beneath. They see the wireframes, the flickering lines of code, and the stark mathematical logic that has no interest in the beauty of the landscape it sustains. They realize that the mountains are not stone, and the sky is not air. They are merely the output of a process that is ancient, alien, and utterly beyond their control. This is the state of modern cosmology in the wake of the anomaly. We have looked past the rendered horizon of our universe and seen the machinery of the simulation. The energy density of 3I Atlas, its violation of the Amati relation, and its emergence from a total vacuum are the raw data points of a system that does not care if its output is logical to us. The machine is not broken. It is simply functioning on a level that our evolution has not prepared us to comprehend. We have mistaken the user interface for the operating system. We have spent centuries perfecting our description of the icons on the screen, never realizing that a single update to the kernel could delete everything we know in a fraction of a second. The indifference of the universe is the ultimate humbling force. It suggests that the laws of gravity, electromagnetism, and thermodynamics are not the fundamental bedrock of existence, but rather the default settings of our local sector. They are the rules of the game as they have been played for the last several billion years, but they are not the only rules available to the machine. The 14-millisecond scream from the deep dark was a reminder that the simulation is still running, and the programmer, whether that be a literal intelligence or the blind emergent logic of a higher order physics, is under no obligation to maintain the status quo. Our universal truths are revealed to be provincial, the parochial customs of a single planet orbiting a single star in a universe that is capable of far more than we dared to dream. In this new reality, the pursuit of knowledge takes on a different, more desperate character. We are no longer explorers mapping a stable continent. We are codebreakers trying to understand a language that was never meant for us. The ancient and alien logic of the machine does not use human values as its variables. It does not prioritize the survival of consciousness or the preservation of order. It functions on the principles of efficiency, energy states, and computational limits. 3I Atlas was a moment where the efficiency of the vacuum was tested, where a new energy state was briefly achieved, and the fact that it happened to break our instruments and challenge our philosophy is of no consequence to the system. This shift from participants to observers of an indifferent machine is a profound psychological threshold. It forces us to confront the possibility that we are not the protagonists of the cosmic story, but rather a byproduct of its complexity, a self-aware error in the data stream that has developed the capacity to notice the glitches. The beauty we see in the stars and the elegance we find in equations are human impositions on a system that is essentially mathematical and cold. The raw geometry of the void is not beautiful, it is merely necessary. As we peer through the tear in the fabric of our reality, we see a universe that is vast, ancient, and entirely unconcerned with our presence. We are looking at the source code of a machine that would continue to run its inscrutable programs for another trillion years, even if every observer within it were to vanish in the blink of an eye. The truth is not something the universe provides. It is something we have tried to carve out of a reality that is fundamentally alien to our nature. Within the cold, mathematical engine of the cosmos, a singular and improbable phenomenon has taken root. For 13.8 billion years, the simulation processed the interactions of matter and energy, a vast calculation of gravity and entropy that required no audience. Yet, through the slow accumulation of complexity, the machine began to generate something that was not predicted in the initial parameters: the observer. The emergence of consciousness on a small rocky world is not a failure of the system's logic, nor is it a random error in the code. Instead, it represents a recursive loop within the program, a moment where the simulation developed the capacity to look back upon itself. We are the part of the universal machine that has begun to perform a self-audit, a diagnostic tool that has achieved enough complexity to question the very rules that sustain its existence. In a universe of raw data, the observer is the only entity capable of generating meaning. A burst of energy like 3I Atlas is, in the language of the machine, merely a sequence of high-value integers, a momentary spike in the electromagnetic field. To the vacuum, it is nothing more than a localized shift in pressure, but to the consciousness that records it, the event is transformed. It becomes a mystery, a challenge to the established order, a black swan that demands an explanation. We are the translators of the void, the ones who take the indifferent pulses of the machine and weave them into a narrative of discovery. Without the observer, the 14-millisecond scream from the deep dark would have been a silent flicker in a dead program. With us, it becomes a catalyst for a deeper understanding of reality. This role as the internal auditor of the simulation is unique. The stars do not wonder why they burn. The galaxies do not contemplate the rate of their own expansion. They are the hardware of the universe, functioning according to the rigid dictates of the source code. Humanity, however, operates as a specialized subroutine designed for scrutiny. We have developed the curiosity to seek out the glitches, to look specifically for the places where the mathematics of the universe begins to break down. Our science is the process of reverse engineering the machine from the inside out, a task that requires us to turn raw, cold data into a coherent map of the world. We are the only part of the program that cares if the code is consistent, and we are the only part that notices when it is not. There is a profound significance in this recursive nature. If a grand simulation runs for an eternity in a vacuum of awareness, its existence is a moot point. It is a calculation with no result, a story with no reader. The presence of the observer gives the machine a reason to continue its execution. By perceiving the universe, by marveling at its complexity and agonizing over its anomalies, we provide the semantics to the syntax of the cosmos. We are the consciousness that justifies the computational cost of 13.8 billion years of expansion. The machine provides the structure, but we provide the purpose. Every time we point a telescope toward a blank patch of sky, or build a particle accelerator to probe the limits of the vacuum, we are fulfilling our role as the system's self-awareness. This perspective reframes humanity's place in the cosmos. We are not a mistake, or a biological accident that occurred in the margins of a greater story. We are the only part of the simulation that has developed the agency to challenge the programmer. When we find an event like 3I Atlas, we are not just witnessing a glitch, we are identifying a boundary of the system. Our ability to recognize the impossible is what makes us more than just a collection of variables. A simple program follows its rules until it crashes, but a conscious program notices the error and attempts to understand the logic behind it. We are the part of the code that refuses to be ignored, the observers who turn the cold indifference of the machine into a theatre of meaning. In the vast, ancient history of the universal engine, our appearance is a recent development, a late-stage emergence in a program that was already mature. Yet, the impact of the observer is disproportionate to our physical scale. We have taken the light of distant stars and used it to calculate the age of the heavens. We have taken the silence of the vacuum and filled it with our theories. The glitches we find are the breadcrumbs that lead us toward a more fundamental truth. In a machine that functions on an alien and ancient logic, our curiosity is the only thing that feels familiar. We are the bridge between the raw geometry of the void and the world of value and significance. Ultimately, the observer is the only thing that prevents the universe from being a closed loop of meaningless data. By looking at the broken code of 3I Atlas and feeling the weight of its implications, we are asserting our status as something more than just players in a game. We are the witnesses who turn the simulation into a reality. We are the part of the machine that has learned to dream, and in those dreams, we find the courage to keep looking for the truth, even when the machine tells us that no such truth exists. The 14-millisecond signal was a message from the void, but it was the human mind that decided it was worth hearing. In a universe that does not care if we exist, our choice to care about the universe is what gives the entire machine its soul. The cosmic narrative is not a closed book, a static record of events etched into the unchanging granite of time. Instead, it is a living, breathing program, an open system that continues to evolve and iterate with every passing millisecond. For centuries, we have mistaken the stability of our local environment for the finality of the universal design. We believed that the laws of physics were the bedrock of existence, the immutable pillars upon which all of reality was built. But the legacy of 3I Atlas has dismantled this certainty. That 14-millisecond burst of impossible energy was the proof that the laws of nature are not set in stone. They are the temporary configurations of a much deeper, more fluid architecture, a set of parameters within a grand simulation that is still being written, updated, and refined. The anomaly in the deep dark serves as a testament to the fact that we do not live in a finished story. We are residents of a dynamic experiment, a vast computational process where the rules of the game are subject to the hidden logic of the source code. The vacuum of space is not a hollow void, but a pressurized reservoir of potential, capable of shifting its state and rewriting its own physics in an instant. 3I Atlas was the signature of this evolution, a moment where the machine revealed its capacity for change. It proved that the constants we have spent generations measuring, the speed of light, the strength of gravity, and the rate of entropy, are not the ultimate limits of what is possible. They are merely the current settings of the simulation, the local conditions that have allowed life to emerge, but they are not the only version of reality that the machine can produce. This realization does not diminish the value of our scientific pursuit. Rather, it elevates it to a higher plane of significance. If the universe were a perfectly predictable machine, a clockwork engine that followed a single unchanging script, then our role as observers would be reduced to mere record-keeping. We would be nothing more than clerks cataloguing the inevitable. But in an open system where the rules can be challenged and the code can be rewritten, the observer becomes a vital participant in the unfolding drama. Our ability to detect the glitches, to marvel at the broken code, and to confront the impossible is what defines our place in the infinite dark. We are the only part of the program that possesses the agency to notice when the system stutters, and in that act of noticing we assert our existence against the cold indifference of the vacuum. The story of 3I Atlas is an invitation to look deeper, to question the very foundations of what we consider to be true. It reminds us that the universe is far more complex and far more precarious than our textbooks have dared to suggest. We are living on the edge of a rendered horizon, peering into a void that is teeming with hidden processes and subterranean physics. The maps we have drawn are not records of the entire world, but only of the small, stable patch where we currently reside. Beyond that horizon, the machine continues its inscrutable work, preparing the next update, testing the limits of the vacuum, and generating events that defy our comprehension. Therefore, the pursuit of knowledge must continue with a renewed sense of urgency and wonder. We must not be deterred by the realization that our universal truths are local observations. Instead, we must embrace the challenge of decoding the deeper logic of the simulation. We must continue to build our telescopes, to refine our sensors, and to push our instruments to the very edge of their capabilities. The glitches are not something to be feared. They are the keys to the kingdom. They are the moments where the mask of the simulation slips, allowing us a fleeting glimpse of the raw, unpolished power that drives the stars. In the vast, silent theatre of the cosmos, we are the only ones who can turn the raw data into meaning. We are the ones who give the 14-millisecond burst its name, its significance, and its place in history. As we look out into the deep dark, we should not see a void of indifference, but a canvas of infinite possibility. The universe is not a finished monument to the past. It is an ongoing conversation between the machine and the observer. Our duty is to keep listening, to keep measuring, and to never stop wondering at the sheer, impossible beauty of a reality that can break its own rules. The black swan has landed and the sky is no longer a limit, it is a doorway. Let this be the anthem of our species, that in a universe of 13.8 billion years of cold, mathematical logic, we were the ones who found the courage to marvel at the broken code. We are the consciousness that gives the machine a reason to keep running. We are the observers of the infinite, the decoders of the glitch, and the keepers of the narrative. The story is not over. The simulation is still running, and as long as we continue to seek out the truth in the dark, the machine will never be silent. We must keep our eyes fixed on the stars, for it is in the anomalies, the exceptions, and the impossibly bright flashes of energy that we'll find the true nature of our existence. The journey into the heart of the machine has only just begun. If you found this exploration of the cosmic simulation and the mystery of 3i Atlas compelling, consider subscribing to this channel. Join us as we continue to map the boundaries of the known and peer into the raw geometry of the void. Share this story with those who seek the truth beneath the surface of reality, and leave your thoughts on the nature of the universal code in the comments below. Together, we will continue to scrutinize the machine and find our place within the infinite dark. Until next time, keep looking up.